Good evening. Hi, welcome to this Gateway House Google Hangout panel discussion on the economic relationship between India and China ahead of President Xi Jinping's visit to India next week. I'm Dave, I'm with Gateway House, and I'm joined by a panel of three. Joining us from Hong Kong, we have Jack Ma, who is the advisor to the City University of Hong Kong. He's held advisor roles in China with McKinsey, as well as set up NYU Business School in Shanghai. Welcome, Jack. Joining us from Beijing, we have Verma, who is PTI's Beijing correspondent, where he has been covering China issues for the last 3 years. Welcome. And joining us from Mumbai, we have Louis Miranda, who is an advisor to Gateway House. He also advises Morgan Stanley and a number of other organizations. Welcome, Louis. I'm going to delve straight into the issues here. The economic relationship between India and China is perhaps the most promising aspect of the bilateral. But with the economic relationship also has been a growing trade deficit between the two countries, and this thorn has been a big thorn in the relationship. And this is something that is likely to be addressed in the meeting that's coming next. Louis, I want to speak to you on this issue. I want to ask you about the industrial parks that President Xi Jinping is supposed to announce next week. Do you think that these industrial parks will really help lower the trade deficit? What will they really look like?
I think it's interesting there. Thank you. Investments into things like the industrial parks would be good for India because it brings in sort of capital over here. The challenge really is for whether we can get our own act together to be able to capitalize on this opportunity. There will be a lot of flows coming in. What will we do with these industrial parks? What will be the sort of impact on manufacturing that we can do? As you've talked already, the trade deficit is large, and I guess we will discuss that more in detail. But a lot of the sort of exports from India are to do really with commodities, and a lot of our imports from China are to do with manufactured goods. Will these industrial parks help to change that is something which you need to look at. And I presume we'll also talk about some of the challenges with some of the sectors that we're exporting with in the role of the IT sector and the pharmaceutical sector. It'll be good to see more investments by the Chinese into infrastructure into India because they've been able to build that out very successfully. The question really is to do with, and maybe at some later stage on this chat, we should talk about the issue of trust and the concerns people have had. Because years back, for example, Hutchinson couldn't bid for ports in India because there was considered to be a national security threat. So these are some of the challenges which we need to figure out, because unless we get over this trust deficit between the two countries on security, we're going to continuously be second guessing.
Right. Well, thank you, Louis. Jack, you've seen China make investments as they globetrot in a number of regions, a number of countries. What do you think their investment in India's infrastructure will look like, and what do you make of their offer?
Well, I believe that China has, in some ways, the first mover in terms of developing countries in rolling out massive, large-scale, and effective infrastructure. It's not perfect, but it blows away anything that we see anywhere else in the world. So I think that China, in many ways, feels, rightly so, that they have accumulated a lot of experience in terms of rolling out these sort of projects. Airports, dams, container ports, highways, maglevs, high-speed trains, etc. So I think this is really an area, and I think that Xi Jinping, I think that this is one of the areas that he thinks that China can really add value to India. So the question is can India accept the infrastructure?
That's an important question, Zach. And actually, I'm going to pose that to Lewis. Lewis, what are the areas that you think that we should really direct this investment to? I mean, roads, railway. Railway is something that everyone's been talking about. Which sectors do you think we should really direct this money to?
Three areas I sort of put in. The two largest ones are power and roads, because that's really where the most investment is required. And there's been talks about $300 billion over 5 years, etc. So power and roads are the two main sectors. As of now, already a lot of the power plants being set up are using Chinese equipment anyway. Roads has been an interesting thing. You know, Jack, I'll come back to the point which you made about the expertise. And clearly, when I visited China, I've seen excellent infrastructure. But when the Golden Quadrilateral was being built out, and companies and some of the Chinese companies were involved in the construction over there, they eventually, in a lot of cases, they weren't successful. So either they were not being able to manage the environment that they were working in, or whatever. But those experiences at the time of the Golden Quadrilateral build-out, some of the Chinese contractors were not very successful. Maybe I don't have enough information. Maybe they partnered with the wrong guys in India. I'm not sure. But that's really one experience. And then the third part is really, there's a lot of talk now about high-speed trains.
Right.
And here comes the issue of, and that's the problem, I mean, that's something which India has to fix, which is the tariffs. We can't have world-class trains and charge uneconomic rents, because then it just becomes a non-starter.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lewis. Mr. Verma, we talked about, Lewis talked about these industrial parks and setting up of manufacturing here. But all of this requires an exchange of people. And he talked about the trust deficit, and all this requires exchange of people. And for that, we need a liberalized visa regime. Do you expect any visa deal to be done at this meeting next week?
Yeah, it's very interesting. That is, in fact, the visa regime was virtually worked out last year when former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited here. There was a big talk. We all know that the two sides worked very hard on that. But there was the biggest issue was this political issue about visas to people from Arunachal Pradesh, which China calls Southern Tibet, and China continues to rather give stapled visas, which is not acceptable to India. Right. And in fact, the two countries had that experience of sorting out this kind of difficulties, because we managed to sort out this 2011 and 12 most sticky dispute about stapled visas to people from Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. So that has been sorted out. China has given some kind of a rather assurance to India, and it has been sorted out, and the relations became normal. So the nitty-gritty of visa regime are available with both sides for a while, and but this is the sticky issue. So what I understand is there is an informal understanding between both sides to implement this particular liberalized visa regime, that what has been agreed to, without probably signing a deal on that. So in China, I mean, the Indian embassy here maintains that you get your visa in 3 days, and business visa even at times in 24 hours. So they have already taken steps. They're trying, but of course these are the things to be checked on the practically. But there is definitely a sense in both sides that whatever that is being talked about stepping up investments, it cannot be successful unless it is backed by a liberalized visa regime.
That's correct. I mean, it is my understanding that there are plenty of businesses here in India that have had problems bringing in, Chinese citizens to work here. So I'm sure they'll be looking and hoping to exploit these new opportunities.
I think India has to take a decision in this. If we are looking for investments, there will be large-scale inflow of Chinese workers, Chinese labor, Chinese experts, whosoever, which we're not comfortable with earlier, because we have the obligation to provide jobs to our own people back home. That was perhaps the earlier thinking. But that is, in my view, a lot of Indian corporates today who are looking at tie-ups or who are having tie-ups, that includes Reliance and others, prefer Chinese labor because they just come and deliver everything in time. They work. There is a time-bound probably work pattern that goes with that. So there is a preference for that. But I think this is something that the two sides have to decide, because if you are looking at heavy investment flows, India has to live with this idea of more Chinese labor coming to India and work.
Great. Thank you, Varma. Jack, I'm going to turn to you, and actually, we're going to cross the border a little bit, look into China, and look at the market access issues that Indian companies face in China, particularly pharma and IT companies. We know that following the third party plenum last year, the party plans to liberalize investment for foreign companies, particularly in some sectors like pharma. How is it that Indian companies can really look to take advantage of these opportunities that might be presenting itself over the next few years?
Well, I think this is a difficult question, Dev. China's main focus is on improving their ability to create technology, particularly in fields like IT and pharma. So, insofar as you have foreign competitors entering the market, it's going to be challenging. I mean, I think you've seen this across the board in the IT sector, especially in terms of web-based technologies. There have not been a lot of sort of foreign winners in this market. The U.S. led this initiative, starting with Google, and sort of moving on. So I personally, I think it's difficult to say that India, as a latecomer to this game, is going to be able to really make any massive kinds of market penetration. But on the flip side, I think there are a lot of businesses which are foreign invested, which are doing very well, especially in terms of the cloud, in terms of service servers, in terms of pharmaceutical research, in terms of being able to do bedside development. So I think the real issue is for not just for India, but for any foreign company that wants to succeed in the Chinese market, is to look at the entire value chain and not stay focused on necessarily being the end brand. Because China ultimately wants to develop its own brands, and that's what China is doing.
Okay, that's an important point you made. And is there any form of lobbying that Indian companies could take up and follow the American example, for example, with the AmCham there?
Yes, so I think that I've had a lot of contact in my time in China with the Indian Confederation of Industries, and I think that's a very, very good lobbying forum. What I think is that it's a very good idea for India to work with other countries in order to build a lobbying front for general business issues. So clearly you're going to be with some of your competitors, but there's a lot of strength in numbers, and I think that the American Chamber of Commerce, the European Chambers of Commerce, the Australian Chamber of Commerce have been very, very good in being able to push through a lot of what are not, they affect individual businesses, but they ultimately are country level issues. And I think India would be a very welcome player in these initiatives, and it just adds strength to sort of saying, yes, well, we're in globalization. This is the way that the supply chain works. This is the way that things are happening. So this is what we as Indian companies and as foreign companies need?
Thanks, Jack. Lewis, what do you think? Do you think Indian companies can really start getting more aggressive with their lobbying and following the American example to push for the changes in terms of regulations and market access that they need?
I think there has to be a closer cooperation between Indian companies and the Indian government. I remember sort of attending a talk 2 days back with the with the with the new U.S. Consul General, and he talked about how the U.S. government doesn't work closely with the private sector. And I disagree with that. I think there's a very close linkage. So over here, the Indian government has to take a larger role in being able to push through the interests and lobby hard for the interests of the private sector, not just the public sector. And that's really the way a lot of other countries have been able to develop market access. So it'll be interesting to see what Verma has to say about this also, in that does the Indian government need to sort of work harder to push the case for the private sector in India?
Well, Mr. Verma, I think you can answer.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. In my experience here in the last 4 years is that an Indian government perhaps is pushing quite a lot, both on pharma and IT fronts, and I don't see them doing much either. I mean, the private sector itself. About the pharma sector, I think one got to understand the market here. It is a market that is dominated by multinationals. There are huge lobbies. In fact, all of us are aware in the recent scandals about GSK and others, that how they are trying to bribe the doctors through, and there are several issues concerned. They are very well entrenched. The biggest problem for pharma here, despite the fact that ours is probably the far more comparatively, we give far more cheaper medicines, and our drugs are far more cheaper than what is available in China. We are not able to convince Chinese to open up the market because it takes 6 to 7 years for an Indian firm to even. So, which means that you have to invest in this place. You have to keep your people for a long time. You need to, as Jack said, maintain those lobbies, and then probably wait for your turn. So that is where probably Indian government is trying to convince the Chinese government. This is actually not a way to provide market access. This is actually blocking the Indian companies. So, but I personally think that Indian companies themselves have to do quite a lot of work, both on IT and pharma. Yes, Indian government is one aspect of it, but you can't be simply piggyback on all the time on the shoulders of the diplomats and ministers trying to drive your point. You need to stay here. You need to keep your best people. You need to study the markets. And in fact, IT, some of the Indian best brains are here, and they are trying to break into the very tight Chinese market by working project by project. So, how to make an impression about. So what the problem is that we need to rather work on both ways, one on the side of the government as well as on the private sector.
Well, in fact, Mr. Verma, we at Gateway House have been talking about the need for economic diplomacy for many months now, and the need for this new Modi government to really combine the strengths of private sector and the know-how and the networks of the public sector to really leverage India's unique strengths. Mr. Verma, you are in Beijing. You are covering all these issues there in Beijing. You covered the visit of NSA Ajit Doval as well as Commerce Minister Sitaraman that's happened in the last couple of weeks. What's the mood in Beijing, and what's the Chinese media? What are they talking about the visit? Is there anything that the Indian audience here should really know about the visit?
Well, the mood is certainly one of, I would say, even excitement, because I think China knows Modi well. They have dealt with him during the past rather a decade or so. And if you look at entire Chinese investments, there are arguments. India says China's investments works out to over just 400 million. And China argues that it has about 1.2 billion or so. But 90% of it is already in Gujarat. So I think if there is one probably a government in the world that knows Modi well, perhaps besides Japan, maybe that is China. So that's the reason for excitement. And there is excitement is basically because India was averse to Chinese investments. That is how they see it. There was a lot of reservations from our side, especially from our home ministry on various projects. But I must say, for the past 3 years, India has been trying to showcase its so-called $1 trillion infrastructure development projects and wants the Chinese investments. But there was a lukewarm response earlier. But I do see, I think probably the Chinese looking at India in a really big way. But I'm not sure whether it's going to be 300 billion. Possibly they're going to start with two so-called industrial parks, one in Gujarat and another in Maharashtra, maybe coming to about $5-7 billion. But then probably they'll pick up the threads from there on.
Right. Well, thank you for these points. And actually, unfortunately, we are all out of time. It's been a quick but really insightful discussion. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Varma. Thank you, Lewis, for taking the time to join this hangout, as well as for your insightful opinion and insight on this important issue. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do tweet at us on Twitter with the hashtag GHLive. And thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.